Why do we keep asking a question that has no answer? For centuries, we've searched for the meaning of life, only to find it slipping further away. Maybe the answer doesn't exist. Maybe it's not something to discover, but something to create, or even reject. In this video, we'll dive into the radical ideas of thinkers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, exploring their views on the absurdity of existence and how we might confront it, not with answers, but with our own will to create meaning. What does meaning even mean? When we talk about the meaning of life, we're not asking for a manual or a recipe. We're not looking for a step-by-step guide on how to exist. Instead, we're grappling with something far more elusive, the why. Why are we here? Why do we suffer? Why do we keep going, even when everything seems pointless? The word meaning itself is slippery. It's not a thing you can hold or a place you can visit. It's a construct, a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the chaos. But what happens when the story falls apart? What happens when the chaos refuses to be tamed? Arthur Schopenhauer was one of the first philosophers to confront this question head-on, and his answer was anything but comforting. For Schopenhauer, life was a cruel joke, a relentless cycle of desire and suffering. He saw existence as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. We are driven by our desires, but satisfying those desires only leads to temporary relief, followed by emptiness and the birth of new desires. Life is a business that does not cover the costs, he wrote. In other words, the suffering we endure far outweighs any fleeting moments of joy. Schopenhauer didn't just question the meaning of life, he outright denied it. To him, the best we can hope for is to minimize our suffering, to quiet the relentless will to live. It's a bleak perspective, but one that's hard to dismiss entirely. After all, who hasn't felt the weight of futility at some point? Who hasn't wondered if the struggle is worth it? Schopenhauer's pessimism finds a kindred spirit in Emil Cioran, though Cioran takes the argument a step further. If Schopenhauer saw life as a cruel joke, Cioran saw it as a cosmic accident, a mistake we're forced to endure. It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late, he quipped. For Cioran, life was devoid of any grand purpose or divine plan. There was no redemption waiting at the end, no meaning to be discovered. And yet, there's a strange freedom in his perspective. If life has no inherent meaning, then we're free to stop searching for one. We're free to stop pretending that our existence is anything more than what it is, a brief, chaotic flicker in an indifferent universe. Emil Cioran's work is a reminder that sometimes, the most radical act is to simply stop caring. But is this the end of the story? Or is there another way to confront the void? Albert Camus offers a different approach. Instead of despairing in the face of life's absurdity, Camus suggests that we embrace it. The absurd, as Camus defined it, is the disconnect between our human need for meaning and the universe's silence in response. We want answers, but the universe offers none. This confrontation can either crush us or liberate us. For Camus, the answer wasn't to give up or to invent false comforts. It was to rebel, to live fully, passionately, and authentically, even in the face of the absurd. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, he wrote. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, becomes a symbol of our own condition. The task is meaningless, but the act of doing it, of finding joy in the struggle, is where meaning is created. Camus doesn't provide a meaning for life. Instead, he shows us how to live without one. Friedrich Nietzsche takes this idea of creating meaning to its logical extreme. Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, by which he meant that the old sources of meaning, religion, tradition, morality, had lost their power. But instead of despairing, Nietzsche saw this as an opportunity. If there's no inherent meaning, then we're free to create our own. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, he wrote. For Nietzsche, life wasn't about discovering a pre-existing purpose. It was about inventing one. It was about becoming the artist of your own existence, crafting a life that reflects your deepest values and desires. This is the essence of Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, the individual who transcends societal norms and creates their own path. It's a daunting task, but also an exhilarating one. After all, if life is a blank canvas, then the only limit is your imagination. But here's the truth. No one has the answer. Not Schopenhauer, not Camus, not Nietzsche, not me, not you. The meaning of life isn't a universal truth waiting to be discovered. It's a personal journey that each of us must undertake. And while that journey can be uncomfortable, even painful, it's also necessary. To live without ever asking the question, to drift through life without purpose, is to waste the one thing we all share, our existence. Viktor Frankl understood this better than most. In his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl argued that the primary drive in human life is not pleasure, as Freud suggested, or power, as Alfred Adler believed, but meaning. Even in the most horrific circumstances, Frankl observed that those who found a reason to live were more likely to survive. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how, he wrote, echoing Nietzsche. But Frankl's insight goes deeper. He believed that meaning isn't something we find. It's something we create. It's not handed to us by the universe or by society. It's forged in the fires of our own experiences and choices. Frankl's approach is both empowering and daunting. It means that we can't blame our circumstances for our lack of purpose. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, we have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning in our struggles. But this doesn't mean that suffering is necessary to find meaning. I believe Frankl's point isn't that we should seek out pain, but that we can find purpose even in the darkest moments. And if we can find meaning there, then surely we can find it in the ordinary, everyday moments of our lives. As a young man, I used to read this wise old man, Bertrand Russell, and he offers a different but complementary perspective. Russell believed that the search for meaning is deeply personal and that it requires a combination of introspection and honesty. In his essay, The Conquest of Happiness, Russell argues that many people are unhappy because they live inauthentically. They chase after external goals, money, fame, status, without ever asking themselves what they truly want. The fundamental cause of trouble in the world, he wrote, is that the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt. For Russell, the key to a meaningful life is self-awareness. We must be willing to confront our own desires, fears, and limitations. We must be willing to ask ourselves the hard questions. What do I really care about? What kind of life do I want to live? What kind of person do I want to be? This process of introspection isn't easy. It requires us to be brutally honest with ourselves, to strip away the layers of pretense and self-deception that we've built up over the years. It requires us to face our own vulnerabilities and insecurities. And it requires us to accept that we might not like the answers we find. But this discomfort is a necessary part of the journey. As Russell put it, the good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. Love, in this sense, isn't just romantic love. It's a deep connection to others and to the world around us. Knowledge isn't just intellectual understanding. It's self-knowledge, the kind that comes from looking inward and confronting the truth about ourselves. So, how do we find meaning in our own lives? The answer, as unsatisfying as it may sound, is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. For some, meaning might come from relationships, from loving and being loved. For others, it might come from creativity, from making something that didn't exist before. For still others, it might come from service, from contributing to something larger than themselves. The important thing is that the meaning must be your own. It can't be borrowed or inherited. It must be discovered or created through your own efforts. As I said, this process isn't always pleasant. It can be messy, confusing, and even painful. It requires us to confront our own limitations, to question our assumptions, and to face the possibility that we might be wrong. But this discomfort is a sign that we're on the right track. As Carl Jung once said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The journey to find meaning isn't supposed to be easy. If it were, it wouldn't be worth doing. One of the biggest obstacles to finding meaning is the fear of failure. What if I choose the wrong path? What if I invest my time and energy into something that ultimately doesn't fulfill me? These are valid concerns, but they're also paralyzing. The truth is that there are no guarantees in life. We can't know for sure whether the choices we make will lead to happiness or fulfillment. But we can't let that uncertainty stop us from making choices. As the existentialists would say, we're condemned to be free. We have no choice but to choose. And in choosing, we create ourselves. This is where the idea of authenticity becomes crucial. To live authentically means to live in accordance with your own values and desires, rather than those imposed on you by society or others. It means taking responsibility for your own life, even when it's difficult. It means being willing to fail, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. I am not a big fan of Jean-Paul Sartre, but he was right when he wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." This might sound daunting, but it's also liberating. It means that we have the power to shape our own lives, to create our own meaning. But what if you don't know what your values or desires are? What if you feel lost, adrift, unsure of where to even begin? This is where the process of introspection is fundamental. Start by asking yourself the hard questions. What do I care about? What brings me joy? What am I willing to struggle for? These questions aren't easy to answer, and the answers might change over time. But the act of asking them is itself a step toward finding meaning. It's also important to remember that meaning doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. It can be found in the small, everyday moments of life. In the warmth of the sun on your face, in the laughter of a friend, in the satisfaction of a job well done. As Frankl wrote, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Even in the most ordinary moments, there is the potential for meaning, if we're willing to look for it. In the end, the search for meaning is a deeply personal and ongoing process. Normally, it's not something that can be solved once and for all. It's something that we must continually revisit as our circumstances and ourselves change over time. And while this process can be uncomfortable, even painful, it's also what makes life worth living. As Russell put it, the good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. Love for ourselves, for others, and for the world around us. Knowledge of ourselves, of our desires, and of our place in the universe. So, what now? The answer is simple, though not easy. Start where you are, ask the hard questions, be honest with yourself, and don't be afraid to take the first step, even if you don't know where it will lead. Because in the end, the meaning of life isn't something you find, it's something you create.